The transport ship shuddered as it entered the atmosphere of Kepler 442c, a world that had earned its reputation as the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. Jake Morrison pressed his face against the small window and watched the alien landscape rush past below him. Red sand stretched endlessly in all directions, broken only by twisted black rocks that jutted from the ground like broken teeth. The sky above was a sickly yellow color, and strange purple clouds drifted across it like oil on water. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he thought about what lay ahead. The Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences had created this survival test to find the strongest species in the galaxy, and somehow Earth had been invited to participate. Most people back home thought it was a joke or maybe an insult. Humans were considered primitive by galactic standards, barely worthy of notice among the great civilizations that spanned the stars. Sitting across from him in the transport was Commander Zethkar, a 7-foot-tall reptilian creature from the Coalition worlds. His green scales gleamed under the artificial lights, and his yellow eyes never seemed to blink. The commander wore a suit that looked like it cost more than Jake's entire salary, filled with computers and sensors that monitored everything from air quality to radiation levels. When Zethkar spoke, his voice came through a translator that made him sound like he was speaking from inside a metal box. "Human," Zethkar said, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "Your species should not have been permitted to participate in this examination. You lack the technology to survive even one day on this world." Jake shrugged and continued looking out the window. He had heard similar comments from every other contestant during the 3-day journey to Kepler 442c. They all seemed to think that because humans used primitive technology compared to theirs, they were automatically inferior. What they didn't understand was that humans had spent millions of years learning to survive on a world that had tried to kill them at every turn. Near the front of the transport sat Ambassador Yulinara from the Crystalline Confederation. Her body was made of what looked like living diamond, and she glowed with an inner light that shifted from blue to purple to green as her emotions changed. She had been studying data tablets since the journey began, memorizing every detail about the planet's surface conditions, weather patterns, and known dangers. Her people had mastered energy manipulation on a level that seemed like magic to most other species. The electromagnetic storms occur every 47 hours. She announced to no one in particular, her voice sounding like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. They last for approximately 6 hours and can disable most electronic equipment. The radiation levels during these storms are lethal to most organic life forms. Jake nodded politely but didn't say anything. He had read the same reports, but he was more interested in the things the reports didn't mention, like how the plants in the photographs seemed to lean in certain directions, probably toward water sources, or how the rock formation suggested there might be cave systems that could provide shelter. The other contestants were so focused on their equipment and technology that they seemed to forget the most basic rule of survival: adapt to your environment. Instead of trying to force your environment to adapt to you, the transport also carried representatives from 10 other species, each one more advanced than humanity according to the galactic hierarchy. There was Telmari from the Psionic Collective, who could read minds and move objects with her thoughts. Vorthak represented the insectoid hive, a species that had conquered 12 solar systems through superior numbers and coordination. Nexandra came from the Aquatic Collective, beings who had learned to survive in the crushing depths of ocean worlds. Each of them wore or carried equipment that would have been considered miraculous on Earth. Vorthak's exoskeleton was enhanced with artificial muscles that could lift several tons. Nixandra wore a suit that could recycle water with perfect efficiency and generate breathable atmosphere from almost any gas mixture. Telmari needed no equipment at all, since her mental powers allowed her to shield herself from most environmental hazards. Jake carried a backpack with basic survival gear, a knife, some rope, a water purification kit, and a few other simple tools. Compared to the other contestants, he looked like a caveman preparing to fight a war with a stick. The irony wasn't lost on him that his grandfather, who had taught him most of what he knew about survival, probably would have been better equipped. for this challenge than any of the high-tech aliens surrounding him. The transport began its final descent toward the planet's surface. Through the window, Jake could see the landing zone the Academy had chosen, a flat area surrounded by rocky hills and strange vegetation. The plants didn't look like anything from Earth. They were tall and thin, with leaves that seemed to move, even when there was no wind. Some of them glowed with a faint phosphorescent light, while others appeared to be covered in what looked like fur or scales. "Contestants, prepare for landing," the ship's computer announced in a dozen different languages. "Upon touchdown, you will have 30 minutes to gather your equipment and exit the transport. The survival examination will begin immediately after the transport departs. You will have 30 standard days to survive on Kepler 442c using only the equipment you brought with you. No communication with your homeworlds will be permitted. No rescue operations will be conducted unless you activate your emergency beacon, which will result in immediate disqualification." Jake felt his heart beating faster as the transport touched down with a soft thump. Around him, the other contestants began checking their equipment one final time. Zethkar activated dozens of sensors and monitors, filling the air with electronic beeping sounds. Yelanara began glowing brighter as she charged her energy reserves. Telmari closed her eyes and seemed to be scanning the area with her mind. The transport's door opened with a hiss, and Jake got his first breath of alien air. It smelled like copper and ozone, with an underlying scent that reminded him of rotting vegetation. The gravity was noticeably stronger than Earth's, making his backpack feel heavier than it should. The temperature was uncomfortably warm, and he could already feel sweat beginning to form on his forehead. One by one, the contestants filed out of the transport and spread across the landing zone. Jake was the last to leave, taking a moment to look around and get his bearings. The red sand beneath his feet was fine and soft like powder. The rocky hills in the distance showed signs of erosion that suggested there might be water sources somewhere in the area. The strange plants seemed to be watching him, though he knew that was probably just his imagination. As the transport lifted off and disappeared into the yellow sky, Jake Morrison found himself alone on an alien world with 12 other beings, who considered him the least likely to survive. What they didn't know was that he had been preparing for this moment his entire life, even if he hadn't realized it until now. The first night on Kepler 442c was a disaster for most of the contestants. Jake Morrison woke up to the sound of screaming coming from somewhere in the distance. The alien sun had set hours ago, and the planet's surface had become cold enough to freeze water. He pulled his simple sleeping bag tighter around himself and listened to the sounds of the night. Ambassador Yelanara's crystalline body was glowing brighter than usual, which Jake had learned meant she was stressed or afraid. Her energy-based heating system was working overtime to keep her internal temperature stable, and he could see the light from her body casting strange shadows across the landscape. She had built her shelter on a flat piece of ground about 100 meters away, using some kind of force field technology to create a protective dome around herself. Commander Zethkar had activated every piece of equipment he carried, turning his campsite into a small electronic city. Sensors beeped and hummed constantly, monitoring air quality, radiation levels, seismic activity, and a dozen other environmental factors. His shelter was a prefabricated structure made from materials that probably cost more than most humans would earn in a lifetime. Despite all his technology, Jake could see the reptilian commander pacing back and forth inside his shelter, his yellow eyes scanning the darkness for threats. Jake had taken a different approach to his first night on the alien world. Instead of fighting against the environment, he had spent the afternoon learning about it. He had tested the wind patterns by dropping small pieces of sand and watching how they moved. He had examined the strange plants to see which ones might be useful and which ones might be dangerous. Most importantly, he had found a natural depression in the ground near some large rocks that would provide shelter from the wind and help retain heat during the cold night. His shelter was nothing more than a simple lean-to made from branches and leaves he had gathered from the area. It wasn't high-tech like the alien structures, but it was effective. The rocks absorbed heat from the alien sun during the day and released it slowly at night. keeping his sleeping area several degrees warmer than the surrounding area. He had also noticed that certain plants seemed to generate their own heat, and he had positioned his shelter near a cluster of these warm-producing vegetation. By the second day, the first casualty occurred. Vorthek of the insectoid hive had been found dead in his shelter, his enhanced exoskeleton unable to protect him from the planet's toxic atmosphere. His species had evolved on a world with a completely different atmospheric composition, and, despite his advanced filtration systems, the alien gases had slowly poisoned him during the night. The other contestants found his body. When they went to check on him after he failed to respond to their calls, Telmari from the Psionic Collective used her mental powers to scan the area around Vorthek's shelter. She reported that the insectoid had died peacefully in his sleep, his body simply shutting down as the toxins overwhelmed his biological systems. The news sent waves of fear through the remaining contestants, who began checking and rechecking their own protective equipment. Jake felt sorry for Vorthek, but he wasn't surprised by what had happened. The insectoid had relied completely on his technology to protect him from the environment, never considering that his equipment might fail or be inadequate for the planet's unique conditions. Jake had spent his second day testing small amounts of the local atmosphere, allowing his body to gradually adapt to the alien air. It was a risky strategy, but it was based on how humans had survived on Earth for millions of years. The third day brought another death. Nixandra from the Aquatic Collective had been found collapsed near her water recycling unit, her body completely dehydrated. Her advanced equipment had malfunctioned during the night, and without a backup water source, she had died within hours. The other contestants stared at her body in shock, realizing that their sophisticated technology might not be as reliable as they had believed. Jake had been collecting water since his first day on the planet, using methods his grandfather had taught him years ago. He had found several plants that collected moisture from the air in their leaves, and he had learned to extract this water using simple pressure and filtering techniques. He had also discovered that certain rocks in the area were porous and absorbed water during the brief morning dew period, releasing it slowly throughout the day when pressure was applied. Commander Zethkar approached Jake on the fourth day, his yellow eyes filled with curiosity and concern. The reptilian commander had been watching the humans' activities with growing interest, unable to understand how someone with such primitive equipment could seem so comfortable in this hostile environment. "Human Jake," Zethkar said through his translator, "I have observed your behavior since our arrival. You do not use advanced technology like the rest of us, yet you appear to be thriving while others have perished. How is this possible?" Jake looked up from the plant fibers he was weaving into rope and smiled. "Back on Earth, my grandfather used to say that the strongest tree isn't the one that never bends, but the one that bends without breaking. I'm not trying to fight this planet or force it to be like Earth. I'm learning to live with it." The commander tilted his head in confusion. "But your equipment is primitive. Your shelter is made from local materials. Your water collection system uses no electronic components. How can such simple methods be more effective than our advanced technology?" Jake stood up and gestured toward the landscape around them. "Your technology was designed for the conditions on your homeworld or for generic space environments. This planet is unique, with its own rules and its own challenges. My methods might be simple, but they're adaptable. When your equipment breaks down, you're helpless. When my equipment fails, I can build new equipment from whatever materials are available." By the fifth day, Jake had noticed something interesting happening to his body. The alien air that had made him feel sick on the first day was now easier to breathe. The strange food sources he had been testing in small amounts were no longer causing stomach problems. His skin, which had been irritated by the planet's unusual atmosphere, was becoming less sensitive to the environmental conditions. What Jake didn't realize was that his human physiology was beginning to adapt to Kepler 442c in ways that would have amazed the galaxy's greatest scientists. His kidneys were learning to process the planet's mineral-heavy water more efficiently. His digestive system was developing new enzymes to break down the local plant matter. His immune system was cataloging and creating defenses against the planet's Unique pathogens and toxins. Ambassador Yelanara had been monitoring Jake's activities using her species' advanced sensing capabilities. She could detect changes in his biological patterns that indicated rapid adaptation to the alien environment. Her crystalline body pulsed with colors that indicated confusion and fascination as she watched the human thrive in conditions that had already killed two of the more technologically advanced contestants. By the end of the first week, only 8 contestants remained alive. Half of the original group had either died from environmental hazards or activated their emergency beacons to request evacuation. The survivors looked haggard and desperate, their advanced equipment showing signs of wear and failure under the planet's harsh conditions. Jake Morrison, the human who had been considered the least likely to survive, was not only still alive but seemed to be getting stronger each day. His simple methods and adaptive approach had proven more effective than centuries of technological advancement. As he sat by his small fire that evening, cooking a meal made from local plants and insects, he wondered what other surprises this alien world might have in store for him. The second week on Kepler 442c began with a discovery that would change everything. Jake Morrison had been exploring the rocky hills near his shelter when he found the entrance to a cave system. The opening was hidden behind a cluster of the glowing plants he had been studying, and he might have missed it entirely, if not for the cool air flowing from the darkness within. The cave entrance was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and Jake had to use his knife to cut away some of the vegetation blocking the way. As he pushed through the opening, he was surprised by how much cooler the air felt inside the cave. The temperature outside had been rising steadily as the alien sun reached its peak intensity, and the cave offered relief from the oppressive heat. Jake pulled out his small flashlight and began exploring the cave system. The walls were smooth and curved, as if they had been carved by flowing water over thousands of years. Strange mineral deposits covered the surfaces, creating patterns that looked like frozen lightning. Some of these minerals glowed with a faint blue light, providing just enough illumination to see by once his eyes adjusted to the darkness. As he moved deeper into the cave, Jake noticed that the air felt different. It was not just cooler, but somehow cleaner and easier to breathe than the atmosphere outside. He also noticed that his flashlight beam seemed brighter than usual, and the colors of the mineral deposits appeared more vivid and intense. Something about this place was affecting his senses in ways he couldn't explain. The cave system extended much further than Jake had expected. He followed the main passage for nearly an hour, marking his path with small piles of stones so he could find his way back. The tunnel branched off in several directions, creating a network of passages that seemed to go on forever. Some of the side passages were too narrow to explore, while others opened into chambers large enough to hold a small building. In one of these larger chambers, Jake made a discovery that took his breath away. The walls were covered with the same glowing minerals he had seen throughout the cave system, but here they formed intricate patterns that looked almost like writing. The blue light was much brighter in this chamber, and Jake could see clearly without his flashlight. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water so clear it looked like liquid crystal. Jake approached the pool carefully, testing the ground with each step to make sure it was solid. The water was perfectly still, reflecting the glowing patterns on the walls like a mirror. He knelt beside the pool and cupped some of the water in his hands. It felt warm against his skin, and it had no smell or taste that he could detect. After testing it with his water purification kit and finding it completely clean, he drank deeply. The water was unlike anything Jake had ever tasted. It seemed to energize him instantly, making him feel more alert and aware than he had since arriving on the planet. His muscles felt stronger, his vision seemed sharper, and even his hearing appeared to be more sensitive. He filled his water containers with the strange liquid and began making his way back toward the cave entrance. Outside, the situation was becoming desperate for the remaining contestants. The alien sun had been growing more intense each day, and the electromagnetic storms that Ambassador Yelanara had warned about were becoming more frequent and more powerful. Commander Zethkar's sophisticated monitoring equipment had begun failing as the radiation levels increased. Beyond its design limits. Telmari from the Psionic Collective was having her own problems. The planet's strange electromagnetic fields were interfering with her mental powers, making it difficult for her to use her telepathic abilities. She had been relying on her psychic shields to protect her from environmental hazards, but these defenses were becoming weaker as the interference grew stronger. Jake returned to his shelter just as another electromagnetic storm was beginning. The sky turned a deep purple color, and lightning began crackling between the clouds in patterns that defied everything he knew about weather. The other contestants hurried into their shelters and activated their protective systems, but Jake simply sat outside and watched the storm with fascination. The lightning was beautiful in a way that was almost hypnotic. Instead of the random bolts he was used to seeing on Earth, these electrical discharges followed specific patterns, creating geometric shapes in the sky that lasted for several seconds before fading away. The storm seemed to be following some kind of natural rhythm, pulsing in waves that reminded Jake of a heartbeat. As the storm intensified, Jake noticed something strange happening to his body. His skin began to tingle, not with pain but with what felt like energy. The sensation started in his hands and feet and gradually spread throughout his entire body. He could feel his heart beating faster, but instead of feeling tired or stressed, he felt more alive than ever before. The changes became more noticeable over the following days. Jake's strength increased dramatically, allowing him to lift and carry objects that would have been impossible for him before. His reflexes became faster, and he found himself reacting to sounds and movements before he was consciously aware of them. Most remarkably, his senses expanded beyond anything he had thought possible. He could now smell water sources from incredible distances, even when they were hidden underground. His hearing had become so acute that he could identify different types of animals by the sound of their footsteps. His vision had improved to the point where he could see clearly in almost complete darkness, and he could detect subtle changes in plant coloration that indicated their health and nutritional content. Jake began to suspect that his time in the cave system had triggered these changes, but he didn't understand how or why. The water he had drunk from the crystal pool seemed to have started a process of transformation in his body that was continuing even after he had left the cave. Every day brought new abilities and enhancements that made him more perfectly adapted to survive on this hostile world. Dr. Lisa Carter, monitoring the examination from the orbiting research station, was the first to notice the extraordinary changes in Jake's biological readings. Her instruments detected massive shifts in his cellular structure, genetic modifications that should have been impossible without advanced medical intervention. His DNA appeared to be rewriting itself, incorporating new sequences that had never been seen in human biology. "Ryan, you need to look at this," Dr. Carter called to her colleague, Dr. Ryan Hughes. "Jake Morrison's biological profile is changing in ways that violate everything we know about human physiology. His cellular regeneration rate has increased by 300%, his bone density has doubled, and his neural activity is off the charts." Dr. Hughes studied the data with growing amazement. "This is impossible. The human body can't adapt this quickly to environmental changes. These modifications would normally take thousands of years of evolution to develop, but they're happening in real time." What neither scientist understood was that Jake's exposure to the mineral deposits in the cave system had triggered a process that would fundamentally alter not just his own biology, but the entire ecosystem of Kepler 442c, the minerals unknown to Earth science, have the unique property of accelerating genetic adaptation in carbon-based life forms. Jake's human DNA, shaped by millions of years of evolution on one of the galaxy's most challenging worlds, was proving to be the perfect template for this accelerated evolution. As the second week drew to a close, Jake Morrison was becoming something new, something that had never existed before in the known galaxy. He was still human in many ways, but he was also something more. The hostile alien world that had been designed to test the limits of survival was instead creating the next stage of human evolution, one cell at a time. The third week brought changes that no one could have predicted. Jake Morrison woke up on the 10th day to find that the plants around his shelter had grown larger overnight. The glowing vegetation that had been barely knee-high when he first arrived now reached his waist, and their light seemed brighter and more steady than before. The air around his campsite smelled cleaner and fresher, like the atmosphere after a thunderstorm on Earth. Jake walked through the area where he had been living and working, examining the changes with his enhanced senses. The soil beneath his feet felt different, richer, and more alive than the barren sand he had first encountered. Small insects and creatures that he had never seen before were moving through the vegetation, creating a tiny ecosystem that seemed to be thriving in ways that defied the planet's hostile reputation. Commander Zethkar had noticed the changes too. From his shelter several hundred meters away, the reptilian commander watched through his failing surveillance equipment as the area around Jake's campsite transformed day by day. The readings from his environmental sensors showed improvements in air quality, soil composition, and radiation levels that his scientific training told him were impossible. "The human is doing something to this planet," Zethkar muttered to himself, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. "His presence is altering the very nature of this world." The commander's own situation was becoming desperate. His advanced equipment was failing piece by piece as the planet's harsh conditions wore down even the most sophisticated technology. His water recycling system had developed a leak that he couldn't repair, and his food synthesis unit had stopped working completely. 3 days ago, he had been surviving on emergency rations that would last perhaps another week. Ambassador Yolanara from the Crystalline Confederation had been monitoring the electromagnetic patterns around Jake's area using her species' natural ability to sense energy fields. What she discovered filled her with both fascination and concern. The energy signature around the human's campsite was unlike anything in the galactic database, a complex pattern that seemed to be spreading outward in slow waves. The human's biological field is interacting with the planet's natural systems, she reported to her internal memory banks, her crystalline body pulsing with colors that indicated deep concentration. The interaction is creating cascading changes in the local ecosystem that appear to be beneficial rather than harmful. Jake was only dimly aware of these external changes. His attention was focused on the remarkable transformations happening within his own body. His strength had increased to the point where he could easily lift rocks that would have required mechanical assistance before his transformation. His endurance seemed limitless, allowing him to work for hours without feeling tired or needing rest. Most remarkably, his senses had expanded beyond anything he had thought possible. He could now perceive the health of plants by simply touching them, feeling their internal processes like a gentle vibration through his fingertips. He could taste the mineral content of soil and water with incredible precision, identifying nutrients and toxins that his equipment couldn't detect. His hearing had become so acute that he could distinguish between the footsteps of different types of animals from distances of several kilometers. The changes in Jake's vision were perhaps the most dramatic. He could now see clearly in almost complete darkness, and his color perception had expanded to include wavelengths that human eyes had never been able to detect. The alien landscape, which had seemed harsh and barren when he first arrived, now revealed itself to be full of subtle beauties and complex interactions that he had never noticed before. Jake's transformation was affecting more than just his immediate surroundings. Dr. Lisa Carter, monitoring the situation from the orbiting research station, detected environmental changes, spreading outward from his location in an expanding circle that now covered several square kilometers. Plant growth rates had increased dramatically throughout this area, and new species were appearing that combined characteristics from multiple existing life forms. The genetic modifications in Jake's cellular structure are somehow being transmitted to other organisms through environmental contact, Dr. Carter explained to her increasingly amazed colleagues. His enhanced DNA is creating a template that other life forms are adapting to follow. Dr. Ryan Hughes studied the data with growing excitement. It's not just adaptation. He's creating new evolutionary pathways that didn't exist before. The The planet's ecosystem is becoming more complex and more stable as these changes spread. Telmari from the Psionic Collective had been using her weakened telepathic abilities to monitor the mental patterns of the surviving contestants. What she discovered about Jake's consciousness was both fascinating and disturbing. His thought patterns had become more complex and multidimensional, as if his enhanced brain was processing information on levels that her species had never encountered. The human's mental signature is unlike anything in our collective memory, she reported during one of her meditation sessions. His consciousness appears to be expanding beyond the normal parameters of individual thought into something that encompasses the entire ecosystem around him. Jake began to notice that he could sense the health and well-being of all the life forms in his area. He could feel when plants needed water or nutrients, and he found himself instinctively providing what they needed. He could sense the presence of animals long before they came into view, and he discovered that most of the planet's native creatures were no longer afraid of him. The few remaining contestants found themselves in an increasingly transformed environment. The air became easier to breathe, the water sources cleaner and more abundant, and the hostile radiation levels that had plagued them since their arrival began to decrease. They didn't understand that Jake's presence was gradually terraforming the planet, creating conditions that were more suitable for a wider range of life forms. Ambassador Kylanth from the Synthetic Collective was the only contestant whose mechanical nature allowed her to analyze the situation with pure logic. Her artificial intelligence processed the environmental data with machine precision, reaching conclusions that organic minds found difficult to accept. The human subject has become a catalyst for controlled evolutionary acceleration, she reported to her internal processors. His modified genetic material is being transmitted through multiple vectors including atmospheric contact, soil interaction, and bioelectric field resonance. The result is a systematic transformation of the planetary ecosystem that is proceeding at a rate approximately 10,000 times faster than natural evolution. Commander Zethkar had finally swallowed his pride and approached Jake's campsite on the 20th day. His sophisticated equipment had failed completely, and he was facing the choice between activating his emergency beacon or asking the primitive human for help. What he found when he reached the edge of Jake's transformed territory left him speechless. The area around Jake's shelter looked like a completely different world. Lush vegetation grew in patterns that seemed almost artistic, creating natural gardens that were both beautiful and functional. Clear streams of water flowed through channels that appeared to have been carved by intelligent design rather than random erosion. The air itself seemed to sparkle with vitality, and the commander's failing sensors detected atmospheric conditions that were nearly identical to the optimal environment for most known species. "Human Jake," Zethkar said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and confusion. "What have you done to this place?" Jake looked up from the plant he had been tending, his enhanced senses immediately detecting the commander's failing health and desperate situation. His transformed empathy allowed him to feel the reptilian's fear and exhaustion as clearly as if they were his own emotions. "I haven't done anything special," Jake replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the natural sounds of the transformed landscape. "I've just been learning to live here, and the planet has been learning to live with me." The commander stared at Jake with his yellow eyes, trying to understand how this primitive human had accomplished what the most advanced terraforming technology in the galaxy couldn't achieve. As he watched, Jake placed his hand on a withered plant that had been dying from radiation exposure, and within moments the plant began to show signs of recovery and new growth. "This is impossible," Zethkar whispered, his scientific training warring with the evidence of his own senses. "No single organism should be able to transform an entire planetary ecosystem." Jake smiled, his enhanced awareness allowing him to perceive the commander's confusion and wonder. "Maybe that's the problem with advanced technology. It tries to force changes instead of working with natural processes. I'm not changing the planet. I'm just helping it become what it was always meant to be." The final week of the survival examination brought revelations that would change the course of galactic history. Jake Morrison stood at the edge of what had once been a barren wasteland and was now a thriving ecosystem that stretched to the horizon. The transformation had accelerated beyond anything the monitoring scientists could have predicted, turning Kepler 442c from a hostile world into a paradise that seemed designed for life itself. The changes in Jake's own biology had reached a point where calling him human was no longer entirely accurate. His cellular structure had evolved to incorporate elements from dozens of the planet's native life forms, creating a hybrid organism that was perfectly adapted not just to survive on this world, but to enhance and improve it. His skin had developed a subtle luminescence that helped plants around him photosynthesize more efficiently. His breath now contained trace gases that neutralized many of the toxins that had made the planet's atmosphere deadly to most species. Dr. Lisa Carter watched from the orbiting research station as her instruments detected the full scope of Jake's transformation. His genetic code had expanded to include sequences that had never been seen in any known species, combinations of DNA that created entirely new biological capabilities. Most remarkably, these genetic modifications were stable and appeared to be inheritable, suggesting that Jake had not just evolved himself, but had become the first member of a new species. The implications of what we're seeing are staggering, Dr. Carter reported to Earth Command. Jake Morrison has become something unprecedented in galactic biology. He's not just adapted to an alien environment, he's created a symbiotic relationship with an entire planetary ecosystem. Commander Zeth Carr had spent the final week living within the transformed zone around Jake's original campsite. His own health had improved dramatically in the enhanced atmosphere, and he found himself studying the human's activities with the dedication of a scientist observing a miracle. The reptilian commander had abandoned his failing technology entirely, and was learning to survive using methods that Jake had developed. "I have witnessed the impossible," Zeth Carr reported during his final transmission before his communication equipment died completely. "The human has achieved what our most advanced terraforming technologies cannot accomplish. He has created a living world that adapts and improves itself continuously." Ambassador Yelanara from the Crystalline Confederation had been documenting the energy patterns surrounding Jake's transformation. Her species' ability to perceive electromagnetic fields allowed her to see the complex web of bioelectric interactions that connected Jake to every living thing within the transformed zone. The patterns were so intricate and beautiful that she spent hours each day simply observing them, her crystalline body pulsing with colors that indicated deep appreciation and wonder. "The human has become a living focal point for evolutionary energy," she recorded in her memory crystals. "His presence creates conditions that allow other organisms to reach their maximum potential, while simultaneously developing new capabilities that benefit the entire ecosystem." Jake's awareness had expanded to encompass the entire transformed region. He could feel the health and vitality of every plant, sense the movements of every animal, and perceive the complex chemical interactions that maintain the balance of life throughout the area. This expanded consciousness didn't feel overwhelming or confusing. Instead, it felt natural and right, as if this was how awareness was meant to function. The rescue ships arrived on the 30th day to find a world that bore no resemblance to the hostile planet described in their mission briefings. Instead of barren red sand and twisted black rocks, they found rolling green hills covered with vegetation that seemed to glow with inner light. Clear blue streams flowed through valleys filled with flowers that released fragrances designed to promote health and well-being in multiple species. Captain Ben Parker, commanding the lead rescue vessel, stared at his instruments in disbelief. "This can't be the same planet we dropped them on 30 days ago. The atmospheric composition is completely different. The radiation levels are within safe parameters for most known species. Even the gravity seems to have stabilized at optimal levels." The rescue teams found the surviving contestants gathered in what had once been the landing zone, but was now a natural amphitheater surrounded by fruit-bearing trees and flowing water. Only 4 of the original 13 contestants remained: Jake Morrison, Commander Zeth Carr, Ambassador Yelanara, and Telmari from the Psionic Collective. The others had either died in the early days of the examination or activated their emergency beacons to request evacuation. Telmari approached the rescue team first, her mental abilities having partially recovered in the improved environment. You must understand that what has happened here exceeds the parameters of the original examination, she communicated telepathically to the rescue team's leaders. The human has achieved something that will require us to reconsider our understanding of biology, evolution, and consciousness itself. Jake stood in the center of the transformed landscape, his enhanced senses allowing him to perceive the approach of the rescue ships long before they became visible. His appearance had changed subtly but significantly during his month on the planet. His hair had developed natural highlights that seemed to shift color depending on the lighting. His eyes had gained an inner luminescence that made them appear to glow softly in dim light. Most remarkably, his skin had developed a texture that looked normal but felt different, as if it contained microscopic structures that served functions beyond simple protection. The leader of the rescue team, Dr. Patricia Wells from the Galactic Academy, approached Jake with a mixture of scientific curiosity and genuine awe. "Mr. Morrison, we need to understand what has happened here. Our sensors indicate that you have undergone biological changes that should be impossible according to our current understanding of genetics and evolution." Jake smiled, his enhanced empathy allowing him to sense Dr. Wells' excitement and confusion. "I think I've become what humans were always meant to be when we're free to adapt without artificial limitations. This planet didn't try to kill me, it taught me." The examination of Jake's transformation revealed that he had developed capabilities that seemed like science fiction to the galaxy's most advanced scientists. He could accelerate the healing of injured organisms through direct contact. He could sense and neutralize toxins in the environment before they became dangerous. Most remarkably, he could somehow transmit genetic improvements to other organisms, allowing them to adapt and evolve at accelerated rates. Commander Zethkar stepped forward to address the rescue team. "I came to this world believing that superior technology was the measure of a species' worth. I leave it understanding that adaptation and harmony with natural systems are far more powerful than any machine we could build." Dr. Wells studied the data her team had collected, trying to comprehend the full implications of what she was seeing. "Jake, your genetic structure has fundamentally changed. You've become something new, something that has never existed before in recorded galactic history. The question is, what do you want to do with these abilities?" Jake looked around at the transformed landscape, feeling the pulse of life that flowed through every plant and animal in the area. He could sense the potential for similar transformations on countless other worlds throughout the galaxy, places where life struggled against hostile conditions that could be overcome through the same process he had experienced. "I want to share this with others," Jake said, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the natural sounds of the transformed environment. "Not just with humans, but with any species that wants to learn how to live in harmony with their environment instead of fighting against it." The rescue team prepared to transport the survivors back to their respective homeworlds, but they all knew that the real journey was just beginning. Jake Morrison had become more than a survivor of the galaxy's most challenging examination. He had become the first member of a new species, one with the ability to transform entire worlds through the power of conscious evolution. As the ships prepared for departure, Jake took one last look at the planet that had changed him so completely. Kepler 442c was no longer the hostile world described in the examination briefings. It had become a living laboratory where the impossible had become reality, where a primitive human had evolved into something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of life itself. The survival examination had ended, but the real test of what Jake had become was about to begin. A new species had emerged, one with the power to heal worlds and guide evolution itself. The galaxy would never be the same.